It's about 5 years in. I think next month Alain will have been CEO for 5 years. And it's something where a big turnaround, one of the big turnaround stories in Canada in the last couple decades that I've been watching the Canadian industry and all across Canada. It's a big story. But when you think about it, they've had troubles with transportation over in the UK and Europe, delivering on some of their promises. They had some problems in Toronto, as we know. So it's something where that division, they're struggling with some ways, and that's affected their cash flow. And that's been a big focus for Alain and his team to make sure that that delivers more on their promises when they make them. So that's one issue. The second one, you think about the agreement with Airbus. It's been great for the C-Series. It's been many more orders, like doubled the order book up, I believe, up to around 600 planes now. They also have just a lot more credibility in the marketplace because they're the number one or two in the world, depending on how you define it, along with Boeing. And Boeing, as we know from the 737 MAX story, has had some real problems lately. So that's been great for that. But it means that as they try to ramp that up and really take advantage of this circumstance, how well it's doing, Bombardier can't afford to put a lot of cash into it. Bombardier is looking at over $9 billion in debt, and this is just a major headache for them that Alain and his team has got to deal with. Questioning how to deal with it. Part of it is that we're not going to give any more money to the Airbus joint venture because we just can't afford it to, but they need the money to ramp it up and to take full advantage of that success.
Yeah. Carl,
so
you're saying a lot, so I want to stop and go through everything just for our audience here. Yeah. We'll come back to the rail part, which you start with, but so given everything surrounding the former C-Series, now A220, what do you think the options are for that? I mean, if they would get out of that business, would that mean they sell that to Airbus, they bring in another part? Like, how might that work, do you think?
Well, it's something where they may get some money. There's an agreement in place, and it depends what milestones they've reached and that sort of thing. So there's kind of a document to look at. I think their main concern is not so much how much they get out of it, but they don't have to give any more into it, I think is more the issue. So that's the concern from a cash flow viewpoint.
So that's the story on what's happening with the A220. Just to circle back on the rail part of it, is there anything you've noticed with that business that would just really speak to the challenges there have been there on delivering or in this case, disappointing investors?
Well, something where they've struggled with delivering the technology and the products, which are great products, on time and in order. And so that's something where it's about just doing it and delivering it. They've struggled with that. It's also sometimes governments can change their minds as they go along, and your big customers tend to be governments or the equivalent of crown corporations like VIA, where the customers are not your average business kind of customer. And so I think partly they've dropped the ball. Partly it's the nature of the industry, but they dropped the ball to a considerable degree at times is really part of the issue.
So they have made huge divestments, moving away from commercial aircraft. We've seen a lot of those headlines over the last couple of years, and now they're making this move potentially to try to conserve capital related to A220, the next chapter of that. Where do you think, when is crunch time really going to hit for them? Because we had a poll on our website this morning where we threw a few different options out there for Bombardier. We included on that list the idea that maybe they go private. And in the early poll results, most people who have weighed in have chosen that go private option. I mean, what do you think about that?
That's an intriguing one. I have to give some thought to it right off. I'm not sure why there's that much excitement about it. I think the bigger question may be, because you really have business jets and the train side, two businesses. They've sold off the Q400. The C-Series is over Airbus now, as we've talked about. You have the CRJ sold off to Mitsubishi. There's not a lot more to sell. You're really down to business jets or trains. That's their two business units. The big thing would be to sell one of them. And then you become purely a pure play of either transportation, train side, or business jets. That would be a real possibility, but it's a big dramatic move for sure. But one that might be necessary to solve the cash flow issue. But then it boils down to how much money and who's going to give you what money for which of the two units. But I think that's the question they're giving some serious thought to right now.
And in terms of other things that they could be doing with the business, I mean, what are you going to be watching for in terms of like Like how they conserve some of that capital?
Well, they've done some already dramatic moves already. I'm not sure what more they can do. I think the main thing is just deliver. And that's something Alain as a message has been delivering, getting to the troops for a while, that ladies and gentlemen, we have to deliver what we promise. Let's not overpromise, but they've got to go in there and make sure on the train side they deliver on time, to spec, and that they work. Now, there's going to be occasional problems, we understand, but they've had too many problems, whether it be New York, Toronto, London, and so on. They've got to solve that, and that's a major issue they've been working on to make sure they have a culture of delivery and making it happen. So I think that's probably the number one issue on Alain's things to do over the next year or two.
All right, so you mentioned Alain Bellemare has been in this job for several years now. While we were speaking, I tracked the performance of Bombardier stock during his tenure, and it's coming up, the calculation on Bloomberg over that period, going back to 2015, a decline of nearly 57% for Bombardier shares. Now, there are some analysts who cover this company who still remain optimistic, but what do you think the story is for investors when it comes to having confidence in the management team?
I think Alain has done an excellent job in a very tough turnaround, extremely difficult turnaround. I admire that he had the chutzpah to take on the job. It was something where I know I talked to other people and said there's no way they're going to touch that because it was just too challenging. So I really appreciate the fact that Alain stepped up to the plate and has he's actively managed for 5 years. It's going to take longer than we anticipated and what I think he anticipated as well. But it's something where they've had almost 5 years now next month. You got to see it through, is my sense. And I think in a couple of years, they will have turned the bend and be much brighter news. But I think it's going to be a challenging year or two coming up still. But I say hats off to Alain for doing a great job, but in a very challenging circumstance.